Hello and welcome. I'm so excited to get on this data analysis journey with you. You probably don't share my enthusiasm just yet, but wait for it. So we're going to get right in and get our hands dirty with Stata from week 1. So let's begin with just first taking a deep breath. And remember that learning a new computer program is sometimes like learning a language, which means it takes practice and perseverance, even when you're feeling a little bit frustrated with it, and knowing how to seek out help when you need it. So we'll talk about those things. So before we get into the program, I just want to go through a couple of helpful tips, which is that we're using this textbook, Statistics for Social Understanding, and it uses both Stata and SPSS. We are only using Stata in this class. That's the software that we're using, so you can pay attention to only whatever is relevant to Stata in the textbook, and it's organized very clearly with sections that say using Stata versus using SPSS. So you go straight to the using Stata section. All of the data for the textbook are available through this website. You're just going to have to bookmark it or come back to these slides from the week 1 folder in order to access the data, because if you're anything like me, you won't remember this path, textbooks2.roman.com/Whittier. So we're going to be downloading the data from this website. All of the other reading and various resources are available on Blackboard, including supplemental do files that I may provide you with and anything like that. The Stata software is what you need on either your own laptop or using a rental laptop from the school, and it's Stata version 15. If you need help installing it, you will call the service desk in order to do that. The important thing to remember about Stata is that it uses 2 types of files: data files, which are .dta extension, and you can see those here. I have multiple .dta Stata datasets, and do files, .do, which contain the syntax that tells the program which data file to open and what analyses to perform on it. So we're going to be working with both of these types of files. And you can see this do file here has a different symbol than the others. Also, a quick note that I am a PC user, so you will see all of my examples on a PC, and hopefully it looks fairly similar on Mac users, but I can't vouch for that. So if you prefer to rent a Chapman-owned laptop in order to be working on a Windows machine, you're welcome to do that. All right, so we are going to get started. You're welcome to look through any of the other resources and slides that contain the glossary of terms. I've just covered these: what a data file is, what a .do file is, syntax, which is the code that we write into the do file to tell Stata what analyses to perform. And the final thing that we should cover before moving into Stata is what a full file path means. It's essentially the address for a particular file so that the Stata program knows exactly which file to open and where to find it. And I will show you how to find the full file path. This is what it will look like when we open up Stata. And here is the example of how to find the file path for a particular file. We'll go through this again, so don't panic if you don't get it the first time. So the file path here is on the C drive, users, gboasting. There are multiple admins on my computer. The downloads folder, and the file is called example.statadata.dta. That is the full file path in order to open up the data set that is currently contained in the downloads folder. So if we open up our Windows Explorer, you can see here it shows me the gboasting folder, the downloads folder, and then example.statadata.dta is the file that I'm trying to open in Stata. And the full file path for that is C, users, gboasting, and downloads. And then we have to add to that the file name and extension. So if we add these together, we have the C, users, gboasting, downloads, / the file .dta, which is the extension. the file type rather. All right, so let's get right into Stata now that we understand what a file path is and what a do file versus a Stata file is. So here we have our first example data set. This is from chapter 1. We're using example statadata.dta. In this case, you can see it's in my 318 folder located here. I'm going to actually go ahead and download it again from the website so that we can do all of these steps from the beginning. So open up a browser of choice, which should be Google Chrome, or else you're wrong. Just kidding. Use whatever browser of choice you'd like. And we're going to open up that link. Actually, I'm going to have to even click on the link because it's too difficult to type in. So I'm going to use this hyperlink in the PowerPoint to open it. And it takes us right here. The other thing you can do is just type into Google statistics for social understanding. Statistics for social understanding. And it should be the first link that pops up. You'll see the textbook, and then it gives us various tabs here. And we will go to the resources and companion website, and that should open up the page that has the data sets available. So let's click on data sets, and now we're back to the page that I navigated to through the link in the PowerPoint. And the example data is the very first data set that we're using for chapter 1. Notice there are two file types, example SPSS.data.sav. That's an SPSS file type. It won't work if you try to open it in Stata. What we want is the example statadata.dta, always paying attention to the file extension to make sure you know what you're opening up. So let's click on download. Usually that will go to your downloads folder if that's what you have set as your default. So if we open up Windows Explorer, you can click on your downloads folder. I have my downloads folder sorted by date so that the most recent thing, the most recently downloaded item is at the top, and that is the example Stata data. And that's what we're going to be working with. So let's double click on this example Stata data. And that was a bad example. I forgot I have two versions of Stata on my computer, so it didn't work for me because it tried to open an old version. It should work for you if you just double click on that. For me, I'm going to go to open with, and then I'm going to make sure that I have Stata 15 selected as opposed to the older version of Stata. All right. And this is what you should be looking at if you were successfully able to open the DTA file, the example stata.dta file, which again you can see is a Stata dataset type. And it downloaded into the downloads folder. I double clicked on it and now it opens up in Stata. So your Stata should look fairly similar to this. We have what's called the variable window here. This shows you all of the variables in the data set. We have only 6 variables here, which is quite few compared to how many we're going to be working with. We're throughout the semester going to be using commonly used secondary data sets that are real surveys administered to thousands, if not tens of thousands, of respondents. Most of them, I believe, are US-based data sets. But this is just a small data set to get our feet wet to start this first week off. So these are the variables. You can see GPA, sounds familiar. This is the student GPA after the first year of college, the number of organizations that students have joined. SAT is satisfaction, so satisfaction with social life on campus, ranked from 1 to 10. Friends, number of close friends students have on campus, whether the student lives on or off campus, and whether they, the number of minutes that they commute to campus for those who live off campus. So just looking at the variable names doesn't tell us a lot. So let's open up a data window so that we can browse the data file. So we're going to open up the data editor by typing in browse into this command box. This is where we can enter commands directly into Stata. We're mostly going to be working with what are called do files that I mentioned earlier, that allows you to keep a log of these commands that you write into Stata so that you can build it up over days or weeks or however long the project takes, and you can pick up where you left off and rerun the do file without having to hand input commands every time. So we're going to be using do files for the most part, but today let's just get familiar with what the data sets even look like. So essentially you can see in this data editor, this looks very much like a spreadsheet. And in fact, this very well could have been an Excel spreadsheet with data before being imported into Stata. And we have 10 respondents. So there are 10 rows of data here. And each respondent has answers on these questions, except where you see periods. Periods show that you have missing data on that particular question for that particular respondent. So as an example, respondent 1 had a 2.8 GPA after their first year of college, was a member of 5 student organizations, is satisfied with social life on campus at a level of 9 out of 10, has 12 close friends who live on campus. 1 indicates that they do live on campus, and because they do live on campus, they don't have a response for the number of minutes that they commute to campus, because that was only asked of people who live off of campus. So you'll notice respondent 3 has a 0 on the question whether they live on campus. That means they do not live on campus, and therefore they responded what their commute time is in minutes. Respondent 5 also does not live on campus. A 0 indicates that they do not live on campus, and they have a 10-minute commute. Lucky dogs. They clearly don't live in Orange County. And respondent 8 also does not live on campus and has a 45-minute commute. That I feel for you. That's about my commute as well. Respondent 8. All right. And so as we look at these different respondents here, we can click through and look at the different variable properties here. This tells us, for example, this variable friends is labeled friends, so it doesn't actually have a great label. Usually the variable label should tell you a bit about the coding. And then if we're looking through at the whole data set, here we can see the data set properties. There are 6 variables with 10 observations. Observations are, in our case, because we're surveying individuals here, these are college students that were surveyed and responded to this. The observations are 10 individuals or 10 people, and they were asked 6 different questions. So we have 6 variables. What is your GPA? How many organizations are you part of? How satisfied are you with social life? How many close friends do you have? Do you live on campus? Yes or no? And how long is your commute if for those who don't live on campus? Okay, so that gives us the summary of the data set here. What else do we need to look at? Let's close out of this data editor, and we're going to take a look at a couple of really basic Stata commands that we are going to use over and over and over. So in this case, we're going to want to create a new variable based on the commute time. Say we don't want commute time in minutes, we want commute time in hours. So instead of in minutes, we want it in hours, and of course you can convert minutes into hours by dividing by 60. So the command will be generate commute2. We're going to generate, meaning create a new variable. We're going to call it commute2 equals commute, which is the existing variable in the data set, divided by 60, so that we convert the minutes to hours. Now you can see this new variable was added here, commute2. If we want to check how this new variable was coded, we can go back to our data editor by typing browse, and you can see now that it was added to the end of this spreadsheet. The variables listed at the top, we have commute2, and we still have missing data here for the folks who don't live on campus, and for those who did respond, we now have in hours. So 0.5 is a half-hour drive. 0.75 is that 45-minute respondent. So the logic of these data commands are all the same for all different Stata syntax. It's the command, in this case generate, the variable, here we've created the new variable name, and then what you want to do, in this case you're telling it to create a new variable based on an old variable divided by 60. So the syntax and the logic is the same for all sorts of different Stata commands. So let's try another Stata command, also using generate. So we'll start with generate orgs2. That is, we're going to generate a variable called orgs2, and we're calling it orgs2 because we're basing it on the original organization, or the first orgs variable already present in the data set, equals orgs. So actually, we're first creating orgs2 to be exactly equal to orgs. But it makes no sense to have two duplicate variables in the data set, orgs and orgs2. So what I want to do now is replace some of the values and change this continuous version of organizations, so the number of organizations that the person belongs to. We're going to create what's called a dichotomous variable, coded 0 or 1, to indicate whether the person is part of any organization, so one or more organizations, or if they're part of 0 organizations. So how do we do that? We first create orgs2 variable that is a duplicate of the orgs. Then we're going to replace orgs2, so the new variable we've just created, we're replacing to be 1 if orgs, the original, excuse me, the original variable is greater than or equal to 1. So we're going to have an indicator variable that's equal to 1 if the person belongs to one or more organizations. And these are standard arithmetic notation here, so greater than or equal to 1. And we want everyone else who's part of 0 organizations to be coded 0. So we'll replace orgs2, again, that's that new variable, to be 0 if orgs equals 0. We do a double equal sign versus a single equal sign here. The double equal sign is used when you're telling the program anything after the if statement. So orgs has to equal exactly 0. And for the first replace command, we use only one equal sign. And if we want to double check whether these were coded the way we think they are, we can use browse again and take a look at this new orgs2 variable. So let's double check that it did what we think it should do. So for example, respondent 1 is part of 5 organizations. So we want our new variable to be coded 1 if they belong to at least one organization. So yes, that's correct. Respondent 2 is part of 1 organization, so they're also coded 1. Respondent 3 is part of 0 organizations, so they're coded 0 in the new variable. Respondent 4 is part of 1 organization, so they're coded 1. Respondent 5 is part of 0, so they're coded 0, and so on. So it looks like we've achieved what we were trying to achieve, which is to create an indicator or a dichotomous variable coded 0 or 1 based on the continuous original variable, which was number of organizations that the person belongs to. We'll talk more in class and lectures on why we would want to do this, why we would want to reduce information. Maybe there's some theoretical reason that we think it doesn't matter how many organizations, at least if you are part of at least one organization, you differ from people that belong to 0 organizations. But we'll talk more in depth about that. Again, right now we're just focusing on Stata and seeing how to work with Stata. All right, so look at what we've done so far. We've opened the data editor using the browse command. Notice if I just type browse, it opens up the entire data set, all of the respondents, all of the variables. Later on, we can open up, if we want to browse only a couple of the variables or only a few of the respondents, we'll learn how to do that. We also learned how to use generate, which creates a new variable. And we used generate along with replace, which created a new variable but transformed it based on an existing variable. And the last thing that we're going to cover for now is how to summarize a variable. So we're going to start with summarize friends. We want what's called descriptive information about this variable. What is the mean, standard deviation, and the range, the minimum and maximum? How many observations are there? That is, how many, in this case, how many people responded to this question? And we can achieve and get this information, achieve this by typing in summarize. And remember, friends is the number of close friends who live on campus. So we can see that all 10 people responded to this question, so the number of observations is 10. The mean response is 3.9, so on average, people have nearly 4 people that they consider close friends to live on campus, with a standard deviation of 3.7. But the range is 0. Some unlucky person has 0 close friends on campus, and someone super popular with 12 close friends on campus. So we'll talk about interpreting in these and visualizing this data in later chapters, but for now, let's just try to remember this summarize command, and the logic again is the same. The command is summarize. That tells the program what you want it to do. And friends is the variable that you're trying to summarize. So summarize friends. And we didn't include any options at the end of this. If we wanted to, we could do summarize friends, comma, detail, and get even more details about the percentiles and skewness and kurtosis, which probably mean nothing to you as yet, and that's fine. We'll talk about these later on. This is just to show that, again, the basic logic is the same for the syntax. The command, the variable name, comma, any additional options to that command. You may have noticed a moment ago that I very quickly made the summarize friends appear. I do that by pressing page up. That's a quick tip on how to go to the last command that you just used. Press page up, and that will go through the previous commands. And then page down to go to the subsequent commands that you've used. So page up and page down allow you to quickly access the previous commands that you've used. All right, so if we do something that Stata doesn't recognize, or we use incorrect syntax, Stata will tell us that it doesn't know what we're asking it to do. So for example, let's say I misspelled summarize with just one M, and it says command summarize is unrecognized. Well, in this case, it's fairly easy for me to figure out what I did wrong because it says the command is unrecognized. So then I look at the command and go, okay, what's wrong with this? Oh, I misspelled summarize. Other times you'll get error codes that don't really mean a lot to you and that you can't really understand, and that's usually when you need to do Google searches. So you can often click on this blue link here that will search the program help and tell you what the error code means. So in this case, Stata failed to recognize the command, program, or a do file name, probably because of a typographical or abbreviation error. So yeah, maybe you gave it, you misspelled it, or didn't abbreviate the command correctly. For example, summarize can also be abbreviated some friends, as opposed to writing out the full word summarize. And maybe if I just did, no, it still works. If I just do an S, that's too much of an abbreviation from summarize, and it doesn't recognize it. So Command S is unrecognized. Stata goes, I don't know what you're trying to tell me to do here. So let's say we are done working with Stata, and we've coded 2 new variables, and we want to save the data set with these new variables that we've created, commute2 and orgs2. You can go up to File. I always like to save as opposed to just saving over the old data set. That way you can keep track of previous versions, and if you ever identify an error, you can always go to a previous version of the data. So here I might save it as example data2.dta to make sure that I distinguish from the original example Stata data and keep that version of the data set clean in case I need to go back later on. And we always save as type Stata data.dta. Make sure you keep track of where you're saving your work. I recommend creating a folder specific for this class and saving your data sets there. And then you might create subfolders if we have assignments or projects, and save those separately from the files that we use for the textbook. And then you'll see that Stata returns this save with the full path of that data set in quotes. So Stata saved in this C, users, Gbosteen, Dropbox, and so on. Don't judge me. I have a data organization problem with lots of Dropbox folders and various subfolders. So my file paths are probably far longer than what yours are going to look like. But this is what the full path looks like for example Stata data2.dta. Notice it's enclosed in quotation marks. And then the green line tells you that indeed it was saved. If it returned red, that means there's an error and something went wrong. So you can see that the organization of Stata syntax is generally white is the syntax, the command line. The green tells you when something was done correctly, and it tells you what was done. Red is for when there is an error. And the blue is a hyperlink or a link that you can click on to open up help for a particular error. All right, so we are done with our first session of Stata here, and we can close out of the program simply by clicking on the X, which will then, because we just saved, it will just close down the program. Or you can go to File and Close. So thank you so much for your attention today, and I look forward to our next exciting adventure with Stata. Join me next time.